The Freedom Convoy, as many people are calling it, recently took place in Ottawa, Canada, where thousands of people gathered to protest the Canadian government's vaccine mandates and restrictions. We've heard conflicting information in the mainstream media regarding these protests. So, with me to clarify what these protests are all about, I have Matthew Tyrmand, who is a board member at Project Veritas. Welcome to Riks, Matthew.
Good to be back.
So can you tell us what these protests are all about in Canada? I mean, we're hearing so many conflicting things from the mainstream media.
So right now there's been a truck convoy going all through Canada toward the federal capital, which is Ottawa. If you notice, the Commonwealth countries, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, UK to a lesser degree, have been incredibly draconian about their methodology to fight COVID. And that has included all forms of modified lockdowns and restrictions on movement, restrictions on who can engage in commerce, forced vaccination or pressure point toward forced vaccination, debate over vaccine passports. So things that in, the Commonwealth nations being those that gave us the common law, that gave us free societies from the Magna Carta on, seeing them descend into this sort of big government move toward tyranny and oppression has been pretty jarring. And the Canadians, being a rather rugged bunch, it's a large country, it's the third largest country geographically speaking in area, and it's a highly diverse country in thought and in its activities. If you look at, places, provinces like Alberta and Saskatchewan, it's massive country. It's highly focused on agriculture and energy and mining. And these are very, very hardy people who believe in, what Obama would have said pejoratively, God, guns, and religion. Canadian people from the provinces, much like Americans from the Midwest and our version of the provinces, have a belief in this sort of rugged individualism, this manifest destiny frontier spirit. So the truckers, who are working class people who have this ideology in spades, and God bless them, decide to put a convoy together and truck all through this massive country, picking up more truckers as they went along, many thousands of them in this caravan that stretched for hours and miles. They end up in Ottawa, and they brought Ottawa to a standstill as they are exercising their right to assembly, using their trucks. The irony is that by occupying the roads, they're being called terrorists by the left, by the mainstream media, by the opposition politically. And these same people extol the virtues of BLM and other leftist radical groups who really did behave like terrorists.
So can I ask you, the Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, he came out recently and he condemned these protests. Yeah. And he also said that this is a fringe minority that expressed hateful rhetoric, violence towards fellow citizens, and disrespect of science. Your thoughts on his comments?
Yeah, well, I think it's par for the course. Again, you've got, a guy like this. The fringe minority is the radical left, many who are in positions of leadership through coercion, through big media and big tech, working to help elevate them or defend them as a digital Praetorian Guard. What we saw, what he describes, we did see with radical leftist protest movements like BLM, who tore down public statues, who burned public buildings, who defaced monuments and buildings, who engaged in acts of violence, who blocked roads and pulled people out of cars in places like Seattle. And this is who Trudeau defends. Now, these working class truckers who just want to be left alone to deliver the goods across the country of Canada are patriots, and they're seeing widespread support across the country. GoFundMe just froze $10 million in donations because GoFundMe is to the left and agrees with Trudeau philosophically. So they don't want to release the funds that these truckers have raised in their protest movement. But again, BLM acts in overt terroristic nature and methods, and these are being defended by these same radicals. So it shows how out of touch Trudeau is. Trudeau is happy to break bread with Chinese CCP leadership or others who are really guilty of doing evil, but his citizens who don't want to have the jackboot of government on their neck as a needle is plunged into their arm by force.
So can I just ask, what are these specific restrictions that they are protesting against?
They're protesting against the continued lockdowns, the stifling of commerce, the forced vaccinations to be able to go to things like restaurants or shopping, the vaccinations of their kids, which is being pushed now as well, forced vaccination of kids. So, the left has always had the fantasy that you don't parent your kids, the state does, and you're just a steward as long as you adhere to the state's mandates. And this totally flies in the face of all natural law, classical liberalism, individual sovereignty, and personal rights. So I think, history will not be kind to people like Trudeau and to these, jackbooted leftists. I saw somebody in Ottawa, I think city councilwoman, who was, to use the modern parlance, clearly a total Karen, who called these people terrorists and said that we need to, get the military. I mean, what are you going to do? You're going to throw truckers in a gulag because they don't want to be forced vaccinated and they engaged in their constitutional right of assembly? And that's a rhetorical question, but the answer is yes. This is what they believe.
So where do you see these protests going? I mean, is the Canadian government talking about lifting more restrictions? Because we see that this is happening in Europe now. We're lifting more restrictions here and so on. And
Canada, like Australia and New Zealand, is doubling down. But I don't think it's going to work well for them. I think, ultimately you're going to see continued support for the truckers. Now in the U.S., we're talking about a similar movement starting from the West Coast going toward D.C. And if Canada could put together several thousand truckers, then I think America will put together several tens of thousands of truckers, and it will deliver quite a statement. Now, we don't have the same degree of overt lockdown restrictiveness that Canada has been facing under Trudeau. But it's, if we do not show the government that in our free constitutional republics, the individual is sovereign, then we will lose that sovereignty and natural law will be, scuttled. The government can do whatever that.
And what about in the United States? A little bit more information there. Is it the lockdowns? Is it kind of different if you go to a different state, or what's going on there?
The U.S. is operating under its classic federalist structure, which is each state has a governor, and rights that are not enumerated constitutionally to the federal government flow down to the states. So the states have created their own policies, and that includes on public health issues. And you see the dichotomy that has been created in Republican gubernatorial-led states like Florida. There's freedom, and it's like life goes on, and it looks much like it looked before, with the exception that private companies like Uber may mandate masking, but otherwise it's pretty sanguine. And then you look at states like California, New York, Illinois, which are the sort of leftiest of the leftist states, and their restrictions are much higher on assembly and get-togethers and movement and commerce. As well as in schools, the push for mandatory vaccination. There'll be all sorts of cases wending their way through the courts in coming months on some of these issues.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'd like to thank you for joining me today. And let's see what happens. I mean, like I said, a lot of countries in Europe now are actually getting rid of a lot of these restrictions. So I don't know, maybe Canada and the U.S. will follow.
U.S. certainly, because Americans see what's going on in states like Florida, Texas, Tennessee, states that are run with more of a freedom orientation versus those that are top-down organized through the sort of leftist fantasy of big government. But in Europe, I don't, I've been spending a lot of time in Europe, and Austria is as bad as worse than the UK, is as bad as Australia, New Zealand. Germany's starting to follow suit there as well. Benelux and Scandinavia are relatively better. Scandinavia especially so. Yeah. As you guys know.
Yes. Thank you so much, Matthew, for joining us.
My pleasure.